Hi, this is Simon Drew, and you're listening to the Walled Garden Podcast. This show belongs to the podcast network of the Walled Garden Philosophical Society, an international community of philosophers and seekers dedicated to the pursuit of truth, wisdom, virtue, and the divine, wherever they may be found. To find out more, go to thewalledgarden.com. But for now, let's caretake the gardens of our minds, one meaningful conversation at a time. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Walled Garden Podcast. So I'm sitting here on my balcony, as you may hear, in Fullerton, California. I'm about 2 months into living in America now, and this country and this state, completely rocking my socks off. I'm beyond grateful to have the opportunity to be over here. And I want to apologize to all of you because I realized that I left you all with a bit of a cliffhanger in that last episode, because I kind of said, well, I've got another episode coming up this week. I'll be releasing it later on this week. And then, 6 weeks later, and here I am. So I guess what happened is I think I got sucked into a bit of a vortex where all I could think about is the particular projects that we were working on in the Walled Garden Philosophical Society. And the time just felt really right to take a breather from the podcast, to pause for a moment, to catch my breath and to, well, yes, to work on the Walled Garden, but also just to deal with the change of going from Australia to America. Not that it's been anywhere near traumatic or a crazy change, but man, there's such a beautiful creative energy that I feel being over here, especially in this state. I had a chance to travel around California and up to Oregon with my wife Jen within a couple of weeks of us getting here to America. And just seeing the pine forests of Oregon and the lakes and the mountains and seeing Mount Shasta in California, Northern California, and spending time with Sharon Lebell in Woodacre, where she lives, and wandering around those beautiful hills and those redwood forests. And it's just been such a creatively intense time. And that is coupled with the fact that in the Walled Garden Philosophical Society, we are really starting to make some incredible progress in terms of putting a phenomenal team together of philosophers from all around the world, and really solidifying our vision and our mission that we're on here in the Walled Garden. And so it's been such a beautiful time. I'm grateful to all of you for hanging in there for the last 6 weeks while there's been absolutely nothing from my end. But that is all about to change, because over the coming weeks, I'm going to be releasing on this podcast the recordings of events that we have run in the walled garden over the past few weeks. And these events are based around a specific theme, but there's really two purposes for these events. Number one, I really wanted to introduce our new contributors, our new philosophers, to everybody following along what we're doing in the Walled Garden Philosophical Society. So every week now, you'll be hearing from a new person who is going to be coming along and either sharing their writings or their podcasts, joining the Walled Garden Podcast Network, or, learning, teaching with us in the Walled Garden Philosophical Society. So that's one reason for these meetups, these events that we've been running. And the other reason is to give our contributors in the Walled Garden a chance to talk about someone from the past or present who has disproportionately influenced their thinking, their philosophical inquiry, or just the way that they see life. And so we've got some beautiful episodes coming up with our contributors talking about people like Heraclitus, talking about Marcus Aurelius, talking about Albert Camus, talking about a beautiful psychologist here in California, Edith Eger. And so there is a lot to look forward to. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share the meetup that I ran talking about Seneca. It's called Ode to Seneca. Now, I am going to be chopping it up a bit. You can hear the entire meetup recording, including the Q&A section, if you go and become a member on thewalledgarden.com. Now, just a couple of things before I get into the episode. Number one, at the end of this episode, I've tagged on about a 20-minute conversation that I had with Sharon Lebell today. For those of you who don't know, we've appointed Sharon as our official scholark of the Walled Garden Philosophical Society. So I talked to her about her role as the scholark. I talked to her about coming to America and our time spent together up in Woodacre. And so that's a little bit of an extra for you at the end of this episode. And the final thing before I jump into today's episode is I want to invite you along to our next event in the Walled Garden coming up this Thursday at 3 p.m. PST, that's California time. Now, I'm going to be kicking off a new series of events in the Walled Garden Philosophical Society on the theme of messages for our time. And so over the coming weeks, you're going to be hearing from all of our contributors in the Walled Garden speaking about messages that they believe are important or vital for the times that we're living in. And so I really encourage you to get along to any of those events. You can go to thewalledgarden.com/events, and you can find all of those events there. These events are free to the public, so feel free to come along even if you're not a member, even though there are great benefits if you do join. But these events are really just about opening up that space for genuine philosophical dialogue around topics that are important, meaningful, especially for our times, as the theme suggests. So anyway, come along this Thursday, 3 p.m. PST, California time. You can find the links for where you can register in the show notes. We would love to see you there. And listen, without any further ado, I want to present to you this meetup recording where I'm discussing someone who I genuinely consider to be my philosophical hero. And of course, I'm talking about the Roman playwright, orator, philosopher, and political advisor, Lucius Annaeus Seneca. Enjoy. I guess, why do I say Ode to Seneca, a tribute to my guiding sage? Seneca was really my first introduction to philosophy. Seneca, his writings, when you read them, you don't feel as though you are being moralized to or being talked down to, or you really feel as though you're being mentored by a close friend, somebody who knows you intimately. And I think that that's the beauty of the epistle style of writing, is that sure, we can all debate over whether or not he was actually writing to a real person. I personally take the view that this was an exercise of his to connect with a higher form of thinking, that there was no Lucilius on the other end of those letters. And I think a lot of scholars would agree as well. There's kind of a debate on that. But to me, when he's writing these letters, it's like he's trying as a teacher to just hit the target right on. And part of the way that he does that is by writing in a very personal style. And so when I started reading Seneca, it was the perfect introduction to philosophy, because I had been reading a lot of personal development up until that point. And then to me, I started reading Seneca and started thinking, wow, there's personal development elements to this, but it takes it to a completely new level. And Seneca is a bit of an onion for me, because he has changed throughout my life as I have changed. And I've noticed different things about his writings as I have noticed more about myself and the world and other philosophies. And so he just, these layers just keep on peeling off Seneca, and there's really no bottom to how, how deep his philosophy really is, if you're able to catch the right stuff. Because I know that we're all so used to, you post a quote to Facebook. Seneca is very quotable. You'll find his quotes everywhere, because you can get one or two lines and it's just brilliant. Here we go, some motivation for the day. But if you really spend the time with his writings, there's such a profundity to what he thinks about. And so as a result, he has influenced me at different periods in my life in different ways, and has really gone along with me on the philosophical journey. And I say my guiding sage because, as I said, he was the introduction to philosophy. And as I've deepened my relationship with his works, I've started to find that if I need counsel, if I need advice in my life, I often recall Seneca's wisdom, and it brings me back to a sort of inner harmony to know that I'm continuing that, almost like a communion, with this great thinker. And so I wanted to read this to start off with. This is a poem called Ode to Seneca. Now, in my poetry about Seneca, tend to idolize him massively. So I know he was a bit of a hypocrite. I know that he was a complex person. He had a whole bunch of problems. And the good thing about Seneca is he actually knew that. He knew that he was sick. He knew that he had many illnesses of the soul. He was another patient in the hospital, just like the people he was writing to. And he knew this. But nonetheless, in my writings, I tend to really lift him up, because to me, he's worthy of being lifted up. So I wrote this probably 6 or 7 months ago, I'd say. Study Lucius Annaeus Seneca if you must study a man. Study his life to learn the trials of a sage. Study his epistles to see a great man sowing righteous seeds among the generations. Study his consolations to see wisdom in action. Study his natural questions to see a fine soul at play. Study his tragedies to taste the fruit of a true poet and wordsmith. Study all of his works, even that those things that were once hidden may be revealed. I'll come back to that. Study the state of affairs throughout his life, as well as his enemies and their critiques, to know the wasteland through which a true seeker must wade on his way to the distant hills. Study the teachers from whom Seneca learned to think. Study the giants among men who were guided by Seneca's works, even that you might know how one man can shift the very course of fate for eternity. Study all of these things together and see the wisdom of the whole. This was a great man. This was a true seeker. This was a philosopher like no others before him. This was an artist and a poet. This man was at home within his highly polished soul. This man was a friend to himself and a friend to God. This man was a caretaker of the highest degree. This man was a divine prophet of God. I'll explain that later as well. This man is a weather-tossed wildflower, mountain wildflower. For he dug his roots deep into the infinite world beneath him, and he spread his branches far into the eternal future, and his flowers now reflect the glory of the sun above, even the light of the Logos. This man is a towering oak tree, for his foundation is firm, his trunk rises high into the canopy above, and his branches now bear acorns, which give way to new life. This man sang the song of the universal soul, which now sings back at him. This man was a wise man, nay, even a sage. This man was shined upon, and he reflected nobly and with great strength. So again, I remind you, I write all of these things knowing full well of his imperfections. But to me, they're relevant because of the effect that he has had on my life and the effect that I know his works have had on so many generations. You look at the incredible people who had Seneca by their side as they went through their lives. You know, it's immeasurable to think of how much influence he had. And this brings me to the first quote that I wanted to kind of dive in with here. I just want to read this for you because this comes from Seneca's Epistle 8. And this gives you an idea of why he wrote what he wrote. He says, I have withdrawn not only from men, but from affairs, especially from my own affairs. So this is at a time when he was trying to get out of politics. He didn't want to be there anymore. And in the Roman times, you know, to do that was not a simple task. You know, it would have been very much like that scene, which I love in The Godfather, where Michael Corleone, he's about to have a heart attack, you know, and he says, every time I try to get out, they pull me back in, you know, like it's just, you know, imagine trying to get out of the grips of being the advisor to the most tyrannical emperor Rome had ever seen. This is not easy. So he's trying to withdraw, and he says, I'm working for later generations, writing down some ideals that may be of assistance to them. I'm going to actually stop there with that quote, and I'll provide this for you guys later because I know I've got a lot that I want to read through, but this is what Seneca was doing with his writings. He could see that the world was in need of some wisdom, and he knew that if he was able to pull himself out of the world in which he was entrenched in politics and actually find some time at the end of his life to write down everything that he had learned, and he was a very learned person. He grew up, you know, in a family that I believe was, you know, somewhat high class at the time. And as a result, he got a really good education. But not only that, he dealt with hardships that none of us could really identify with. He was exiled throughout his life. You know, he was exiled to the island of Cordoba, I believe it was, or that might be where he was born. It could be Corsica. But the point is, we can say of Seneca, well, he had this high-class life. He was the advisor to the emperor. Wait until you try something like that back in that time, you know, trying to get through that life in politics in Rome. Wait till you're exiled, you know, away from your whole family, your country, everything. And it's, you can have a bit of, I guess, a little bit of forgiveness for the man and his imperfections. But this is what I was talking about earlier. Seneca really knew that he was sick. And this is actually every single time I mentor somebody, this is the first quote that I give them every single time. And here's what he says. What, you say, are you giving me advice? Indeed, have you already advised yourself, already corrected your own faults? Is this the reason why you have leisure to reform other men? No. I'm not so shameless as to undertake to cure my fellow men when I am ill myself. I am, however, discussing with you troubles which concern us both and sharing the remedy with you, just as if we were lying ill in the same hospital. Listen to me, therefore, as you would if you were talking to myself. If I were talking to myself, I'm admitting you into my innermost thoughts, and I'm having it out with myself, merely making use of you as my pretext. So how beautiful is that? Like, this is a philosopher who truly understood, I'm in the same hospital, we're both just trying to get better. And as I said, that's just, it's such a beautiful quote to mention to anybody who you start to mentor in a philosophical capacity, because people need to know that we're not putting ourselves on a pet. Man, I've got so many freaking problems, you know, and I fall apart easily sometimes, you know, in terms of, you know, the habits that I try to build or my own philosophical standards. But I think that even having that humility to understand that we are imperfect gives us a bit of space to grow, space to learn, where we don't have to be so perfectionist about ourselves, but we can understand our frailty. And so I love that about Seneca, and he mentions that many times. This section here comes from his consolation to his mother, I believe. And this was the first time that I really started to understand, wow, Seneca had some true enlightenment within him. He was really seeing the world in a completely different way than I had experienced. And so this is him writing from the island when he was in exile. And I want to read this for you guys because it just blew me away when I first read this from Seneca. He said, "How little have we lost when the two finest things of all will accompany us wherever we go, universal nature and our individual virtue. Believe me, this was the intention of whoever formed the universe, whether all-powerful God or incorporeal reason creating mighty works, or divine spirit penetrating all things from the greatest to the smallest with even pressure, or fate and the unchanging sequence of causation. This, I say, was the intention, that only the most worthless of our possessions should come into the power of another. Whatever is best for a human being lies outside of human control. It can be neither given nor taken. The world you see, nature's greatest and most glorious creation, and the human mind which gazes and wonders at it, and is the most splendid part of it, these are our own everlasting possessions and will remain with us as long as we ourselves remain. So eager and upright, let us hasten with bold steps wherever circumstances take us, and let us journey throughout whatever countries. There can be no place of exile within the world, since nothing within the world is alien to men. From whatever point on the earth's surface you look up to heaven, the same distance lies between the realms of gods and men. Accordingly, provided that my eyes are not withdrawn from that spectacle, of which they never tire, provided I may look upon the sun and the moon and gaze at the other planets, provided I may trace their risings and their settings, their periods and their causes of their traveling faster or slower, provided I may behold the stars that shine at night, some fixed and others not traveling far afield but circling within the same area, some suddenly shooting forth and others dazzling the eye with scattered fire, as if they are falling, or gliding past with a long trail of blazing light, provided I can commune with these, and so far as humans may, associate with the divine, and provided I can keep my mind always directed upwards, striving for a vision of kindred things, what does it matter what ground I stand on?" Wow, now Seneca goes on a bit, but wow, you read something like he's striving for a vision of kindred things. He's trying to associate with the divine. This is what I mean. Like when I started reading Seneca, I didn't catch these things because I was in the personal development mindset. Where's my little bit of gold that's going to help me get productive today or to feel better today? But this is Seneca, the deep philosopher who's looking out there at the cosmos and saying, how can I have a rich encounter with the divinity that so clearly is surrounding me here? And that's a completely different enlightenment, as you all know, from the kind of personal development day to day, how can I build positive habits, that sort of stuff. So that just blew me away when I found that. And this is another piece from Seneca that I think has so richly informed me. Seneca understood that we cannot continue to be people who just do what I'm doing right now, but I promise there's going to be a finale. Just quoting all these other philosophers. Look what they said. This is what he said. For a man whose progress is definite, to chase after choice extracts, this is exactly what I'm doing right now, but as I said, I'll explain, and to prop up his weakness by the best known and briefest sayings, and to depend upon his memory is disgraceful. It is time for him to lean on himself. He should make such maxims and not memorize them. For it is disgraceful, even for an old man or one who is sighted of age, to have a notebook knowledge. A notebook knowledge. Think about it. I love that, a notebook knowledge. This is what Zeno said. But what have you yourself said? This is the opinion of Cleanthes. But what is your own opinion? How long shall you march under another man's orders? Take command and utter some word which posterity will remember. Put forth something from your own stock. Now, the reason I say the gatekeeper here, Seneca recognizes that there's a point where that becomes possible. He does say in his writings, like, for the young student, go collect all these great sayings, great. Yeah, put them to memory, because it's going to bring you into a relationship with these great teachers. But there has to come a time where Seneca believed that philosophy had to have an end point. There had to be a point where you actually got it. Because he said that if there's no end point to the path that you're traveling, then you're just wandering to and fro. What are you aiming at, really? And so I say the gatekeeper because Seneca understood there was a time for reading, but there's also a time for actually understanding. And this is something that Emerson wrote beautifully about in his essay on self-reliance, I believe it's called. He wrote that there comes a point where the philosopher actually starts to get these things, actually starts to open their mind to the divinity, the infinite beauty that constantly surrounds us. They form a different relationship with the universe. And in such a way, they immediately get what all these philosophers were talking about. And they don't have to keep on going back to their writings because they've arrived at the source. They're here. And so you can have that self-reliance as a philosopher. And you can trust in what you write. You can trust in what you think because you've found the source from which all these greats were drinking. Now, this next one, I apologize. I believe this is going to be the last quote that I read from Seneca. It's a long one. But bear with me. There's a reason why I want to read this one. This passage from Seneca, I think many people will never come across it because it's not in his epistles. His epistles are by far the most popular writings that he did. This is actually from the first book within his collection of books called Natural Questions. And every time I reread this passage, something else stands out to me. But what I want to focus on here is Seneca was not just a philosopher, he was also a theologian. And he was at a time, and you can see that in his writings, where philosophy, they could see that there were almost two branches. To Seneca, he talks about in this passage how there's the branch of dealing with the things of mankind, the earthly things. But then there's the branch of dealing with the gods. And we would call that theology, trying to figure out what is divinity, what are the gods, what are they doing? And for me, when I read this passage, I finally understood why Seneca is such a beautiful theological thinker, because, well, I'm going to read this. And we'll maybe pick up a few things at the end. And I apologize because it is a bit of a slog. He says, the great difference between philosophy and other studies is matched, I think, by the equally great distance in philosophy itself, between that branch which deals with man and that which deals with the gods. The latter is loftier and more intellectual, and so it has permitted a great deal of freedom for itself. It has not been restricted to what can be seen. It has presumed that there is something greater and something more beautiful which nature has placed beyond our sight. Going back to Sharon's last meetup, there's something more beautiful, something beyond our sight, something beyond our current perception, that if we can arrive there, it's like that idea of holiness, arriving in that kind of frame of mind. He says, in short, between the two branches of philosophy, there is as much difference as there is between man and God. One teaches us what ought to be done on earth, the other what should be done in heaven. Just going to let Nick in. One dispels our errors and furnishes a light for us to see through the uncertainties of life. The other rises far above this fog in which we wallow and rescuing us from the darkness leads us to a place whence the light shines. Even thinking back to our meetup with Mark Vernon, talking about that divine light that shines forth, that the philosopher or the theologian or the saint or the, whoever it is, managed to see this light and to kind of reflect it back on the world. And he says, I, for one, am very grateful to nature, not just when I view it in that aspect, which is obvious to everybody, but when I have penetrated its mysteries, when I learn what the stuff of the universe is, who its author or custodian is, what God is, whether he keeps entirely to himself or whether he sometimes considers us, whether he creates something each day or has created it only once, whether he is a part of the universe or is the universe, whether it is possible for him to make decisions today and repeal in part any sort of universal law of fate, whether it is a diminution of his majesty and an admission of his error that he had done things which had to be changed. Now, this part hit me when I first read it. He said, if I had not been admitted into these studies, it would not have been worthwhile to have been born. And I have to pause there because, like I said, we think of Seneca the philosopher. He's saying right here, if he had not started studying God, divinity, the universe, he says it wouldn't have been why? Why all this? Seriously. So that just hit me because I read this right when I was kind of considering going to study divinity. I was really learning a lot more about myself and what I wanted to write. And I just thought, man, and how beautiful is it that in his writings here, he not only teaches, but he also just gives questions and he doesn't assume to answer them all at once. But he's just, well, what is God? And is it this? And is it that? He's just trying to think about this, think about it, in the Stoic style of let's use our language to try and figure out the mysteries of the cosmos. I just love it. He says, what reason would I have to be glad that I was placed among the living? In order that I might digest food and drink, in order that I might stuff this diseased and failing body, which would soon die unless it were filled continuously, and that I might live as an attendant on a sick man, in order that I might fear death, the one thing for which we are born. That one I haven't figured out yet. I'm working on it. Well, you can have this invaluable prize. Living is not so important that I should even get sweaty and hot. After all, man is a contemptible thing unless he rises above his human concerns. But what greatness do we achieve as long as we struggle with ignoble passions? Even if we are victorious, we conquer only monsters. What reason is there to admire ourselves because we are not as bad as the worst? I do not see why a man should feel pleased who is simply less sick than the others in the hospital. Again, going back to that hospital analogy. He's not too pleased with himself. He clearly understands that he's a sick man. Having good health is very different from only not being sick. You have escaped the illness of the soul, Lucilius. You do not present a false front. Your speech is not composed to suit somebody else's policy. Your heart is not twisted. You do not have greed, nor extravagance, nor ambition. As yet, you have attained nothing. You have escaped many ills, but you have not yet escaped yourself. That special virtue which we seek is magnificent, not only because to be free of evil is in itself so marvelous, but because it unchains the mind, prepares it for a realization of heavenly things, and makes it worthy to enter into an association with God. You guys can see why I love this passage from Seneca, because it's just beautiful what he writes, but also it points out his ultimate aim in everything that he's writing. He's trying to enter into a communion and association with the divine, with God. The mind possesses the full and complete benefit of its human existence only when it spurns all evil, seeks the lofty and the deep, and enters the innermost secrets of nature. Then, as the mind wanders among the very stars it delighted in laughing at the Then as the mind wanders among the very stars, it delights in laughing at the mosaic floors of the rich and at the whole earth with all of its gold. I do not mean to own only the gold which the earth has already produced and surrendered to be struck for money, but also the gold that the earth has preserved hidden away for the avarice of future generations. The mind cannot despise colonnades, paneled ceilings gleaming with ivory, trimmed shrubbery, and streams made to approach mansions until it goes around the entire universe and, looking down upon the earth from above, think Marcus Aurelius's, looking down on the world, right? And earth limited and covered mostly by sea, while even the part out of the sea is squalid and parched and frozen, says to itself, it is that pinpoint which is divided by sword and fire among so many nations. Now, this is beautiful, what he's about to say here. Let me just first point out, back up there was a point where he's talking to Lucilius and basically mentioning, you've arrived at a certain point. What I love about this passage that I'm reading from Seneca here is there's so many parts of the puzzle that he tries to put together, including perhaps the aim of our philosophical discourse, which is to arrive at a point where our thoughts are not our thoughts because somebody else told us to have them. Our words are not our words because somebody else said we should say this. We are completely honest and free with who it is that we are as individuals. We are not trying to please others, but we are trying only to aim upward and to aim for a communion with what is divine, what is beautiful. So now he's basically going to make us feel extremely small and infantile, really. He says, how ridiculous are the boundaries of mortals? Let our empire confine the Dacians beyond the Ister. Let it shut out the Thracians, I'm going to struggle with all of these names, by means of the Haemus. I'm going to skip past this because none of these names are going to be good for me. Between Egypt and Ethiopia, let an uncultivated wasteland of sand lie. If someone should give human intellect to ants, will they not also divide a single floor into many provinces? Since you have aspired to truly great thoughts, whenever you see armies marching with flying banners and a cavalry as though engaged in something grand, scouting now at a distance, now massed on the flanks, you will be glad to say, a black battle line moves on the plain. Now, he's actually quoting Virgil there. And the idea is you're going to think, oh, all these people just marching around fighting their wars, it's all very glorious. Look at how big we are as human beings. You're just a bunch of ants on the field marching in a line. If you really expand your mind, go back into the universe and see down, you're going to see we are so insignificant and tiny. And he says, this army of yours is only a scurrying of ants toiling in a limited field. What difference is there between us and the ants except the insignificant size of a tiny body? We're almost there. That is a mere pinpoint on which you navigate, on which you wage war, on which you arrange tiny kingdoms. Tiny, even though ocean does run to meet them on both sides. Spaces in the heavens are immense, but your mind is admitted to the possession of them only if it retains very little of the body, only if it has worn away all sordidness and, unencumbered and light, flashes forth, satisfied with little. When the mind contacts those regions, it is nurtured, grows, and returns to its origin just as though freed from its chains. Man, we could think about that for so long. As proof of its divinity, it has this: divine things cause it pleasure, and it dwells among them not as being alien things, but things of its own nature. Serenely, it looks upon the rising and setting of the stars and the diverse orbits of bodies precisely balanced with one another. The mind observes where each star first shows its light on earth, where its culmination, the highest altitude of its course, lies, and how far it descends. As a curious spectator, the mind separates details and investigates them. Why not do this? It knows that these things pertain to itself. then it despises the limitation of its former dwelling place. After all, how great is the distance from the farthest shores of Spain all the way to India? Only the space of a very few days if a good wind drives the ship. But in the heavenly region, the swiftest star, which never stops and maintains a constant velocity, has a journey of 30 years. Here, finally, the mind learns what it has long sought. Here it begins to know God. What is God? The mind of the universe. What is God? All that you see and all that you do not see. In short, only if he alone is all things, if he maintains his own work both from within and from without, is he given due credit for his magnitude. Nothing of greater magnitude than this can be contemplated. What then is the difference between our nature and the nature of God? In ourselves, the better part is the mind. In God, there is no part other than the mind. He is entirely reason. Now this, I have to pause here because remember, in Stoicism, we always talk about reason. Do we really understand the reason that the Stoics were talking about? Have we secularized this term far too much to now not see that the reason Seneca is talking about is universal reason? We're trying to connect with something expansive, something that brings us into such a deep relationship with reality. This is Seneca's reason. I'm going to skip down here. So, nor does this nonsense exist only among common people. It also infects those who say they have knowledge. There are some men who conclude that they themselves have a mind, indeed a provident one, evaluating situations both their own and other people's, but the universe in which we also exist, they presume is lacking in plan and even moves along in some haphazard way, or else nature does not know what it is doing. What value is it, do you suppose, to establish definitions, to learn about such things? For example, how powerful is God? Does he form matter for himself, or does he merely make use of what is already there? Which comes first? Does function determine matter, or does matter determine function? Does God do whatever he wishes, or in many cases, do the things he treats fail him, just as many things are poorly shaped by a great artist, not because his art fails him, but because the material in which he works resists his art? To investigate these questions, to learn about them, to brood over them, is this not to transcend your own mortality and to be admitted to a higher plane? You say, what good will these things do you? Well, if nothing else, certainly this: having measured God, I will know that all else is petty. Man, I'm sorry, guys. I had to read that whole thing. I know that's that's almost the entire letter. But to me, when I found that, it was like finding gold. It was like finding something that would sustain me for the rest of my life, because there's such a richness to the discussion there. He gives us questions to think about. He sometimes tries to answer those questions. He gives us an aim to move towards in terms of being free in our speech, to be able to be confident in our own abilities as philosophers, as seekers, to not just be guided by other people, but to find our own direction, to aim at the highest good, a communion with the divine, and to truly figure out what the heck is this thing what is God really? And I love the humility with which he speaks in some senses, but I also love that he sounds as though he's a person who has really come into this deep relationship with the universe. He's arrived, he's there, and now he's looking out and he's saying, come on in. There's plenty of joy to be experienced if we can all have this kind of knowledge. And I wanted to include this as well. This is a quote from one of his plays, which is called The Pumpkinification of Claudius, I believe. He says, his last words heard on earth came after he'd let off a louder noise from his easiest channel of communication. Oh my, I think I've shit myself. For all I know, he did. He certainly shat on everything else. So on one sense, he's this philosopher, but he's also a playwright, and he's a bit of a comedian. you know, and I love that because Seneca was such a prolific creator. We should not only think of him as a philosopher or a theologian, or perhaps even a bit of a mystic based on some of his writings. We should think of him as an artist, because he was, and he wrote some brilliant plays. But I wanted to include that so that he had a sense of humor. So what does all this mean? I'm going to somewhat wrap this up in the next 10 minutes. But the reason why I wanted to kind of encourage all of our new contributors over the next few weeks to talk about the people who inspire them, the people who have disproportionately moved them throughout their lives. The reason I wanted you to do this is because we need to have a certain reverence for the people who have allowed us to get to where we are now. And I don't know if there's anybody in my life who is of the past, any teacher, any great thinker who has influenced me more than Seneca. And I think I find a certain kinship with Seneca because he was such a prolific artist, writer, bit of a poet. He had such a creative spark in him. And think about writing as much as he did back then. All of his letters, all of his epistles, all of his plays, all of his books, there's so much there. And to me, when I think about what I want to bring to the walled garden, because I know that I am, technically trying to run this ship, and there's an organizational side to what I'm doing, and there's an administrative side, and rallying people together. But I try as often as I can to step back and actually do the work of philosophy, because that's what we're all here to do. And when I think about why or what I want to contribute to the walled garden, I want to continue that legacy that Seneca gave us of honestly questioning, what is God really? What is divinity? How can we arrive at a place where we have that communion with the divine, that deep relationship with the fundamentals of reality, universal reason, like what the Stoics talked about? And I found that when I started writing poetry, when I started really composing my own music, even taking photographs and, putting together art pieces, all of it is directed to those questions of what it means to be a human being who supposedly, according to all of our major cultural traditions, supposedly you and I are able to commune with the divine. That's what they're all saying. That's what all these great religions are saying. That's what all these brilliant philosophers are. Seneca's saying this, hey, we can arrive at this place. Wake up. Hello. It's not all about, gathering these little quotes and just being a little collector of all this little wisdom that you found from other people. No, there's a deep, deep, deep relationship to be had here with the universe. And so I just started to realize that everything I wrote was directed towards that aim. And that's what I'm going to bring to the walled garden in everything that I do, I hope. And so I wanted to share this with you guys today. I was up until about 2:30 last night putting this together. But what I've done here is on the walled garden, you guys will see here. Now, some of you are contributors of the walled garden. Some of you are members. Some of you are just interested bystanders. Wonderful to have all of you here. But if you see this, we have on the walled garden site this section called Gardens. And our contributors are able to basically start planting their own garden within the walled garden. Might call it a grove, as Rocco has pointed out. So we've got, Living Well with Sharon Lebell. We've got Roots of the Garden with Judith Stove. I'm so excited to see what you write, Judith, because it's an exciting one. Judith will be essentially exploring the roots of our Western tradition from Plato all the way upwards, and I'm very excited about this as well. And the Prosoche project with David Alexander. David will be exploring this idea of Stoic mindfulness. Prosoche, what does it mean? How can it enrich our lives? The Perennial Tradition with Joshua Bertolotti, beautiful, talking about this beautiful tradition of wisdom, philosophy, enlightenment, that we're all aware of, and Following the Way with Rocco Jarman as well. Rocco will be exploring the way, genuinely trying to figure out what is that, and how can we all move in a better direction here. And my garden that I'm planting on the walled garden, I really want to follow Seneca's wisdom, where he says, what's wisdom is wisdom and it should be shared. If you believe you've got some wisdom to share it. It should be free for everybody, right? And what I'm going to start doing is really adding to this page here, wandering in the sanctuary. I'm fascinated by this symbolism and rich religious and philosophical history behind the term the sanctuary. The Garden of Eden was a sanctuary. The mountain that Moses climbed to, commune with God. That's a sanctuary. The tabernacle that they built, the temples. That's a sanctuary. But symbolically, what's it trying to get at? It's a place where we can commune with the divine. Where there's a closeness between the realms of man and God, right? And to me, when I write poetry, I try, if there's anything that I'm trying to do, I'm trying to get to that place where I can, as freely as possible, commune or build that relationship with the divinity that, to me, seems unbelievably obvious. It's around us. And so if you guys end up going onto the website, this will be where you'll go to find my contributions. And you'll see here all of the photography is of beautiful rainforests that I've shot, and what you'll find here on this page is all of what I consider to be my most important contributions philosophically, poetically, musically, so far to this point. Now, you've got Paradise Suite here, which is my first collection of poems, as well as my first full self-composed album. You've got The Poet and the Sage, which is the book that I wrote. It's right here as well. That's it, The Poet and the Sage. Please get the hard copy as well. Personally, it's a great sadness to think that many people will read my book online or on a tablet when the good stuff is really here in this hard copy. I designed this in such a way that you will hold it in your hands and be proud and glad to hold something so beautiful and well designed and firm. And but nonetheless, if you want to read The Poet and the Sage, I'm making it available on the website for everybody to go and read it, and you can read it here. And there's a whole bunch more, including this very strange mystical set of writings that I wrote a year and a half ago, As Above, So Below, the Book of Prophecy. Just a collection of very strange poetry that, as I said, I'm trying to arrive at that place where what comes out is the most natural expression of me where I'm at. And then if you go down further, there's more music, there's more poetry. And essentially, if you're a member, what you'll get access to is you get access to all of the poetry that I've posted. On the outside, if you're not a member, you'll still get all of what I consider to be my most important contributions to date. And so what I'm doing is I'm posting all of my poetry in there, and then I'm trying to figure it out how it all works together and put it into somewhat of a story on the front end. So I'd encourage you to go there and check it out, because for me, when Seneca says, say something for yourself, well, this is the something that I'm saying for myself, for everybody, I hope. And I believe that it will touch you. If those words from Seneca have touched you, if they've made you seek higher things, I believe that this will do the same. So I just want to say thank you guys for listening in. Thank you for dealing with the long quotes. I had to read them to you. And I would really encourage you, if you haven't already done so, check out Seneca. Spend some time with his works. He makes it very clear that what he wants people to do is read the entirety of his letters to get the full picture, the entire picture. And I would encourage you to do that. So I'm going to open it up for questions, if there are any points of discussion, comments, anything. And then after that, I think we'll wrap it up. I'm actually here in Sharon's home, and Sharon has a piano. So I'm going to play some music before we finish. But maybe we'll have the discussion first, if anybody wants to jump in. Welcome to the new season of the Walled Garden podcast. I want to talk with you, Sharon. And I want to say, officially, here in America, in the same state as you. We're doing projects together, the walled garden. We've got all sorts of things going on in there. And I just wanted to have a chat with you and basically introduce the next, set of episodes coming out from our contributors in the walled garden. So anyway, Sharon, welcome to the show.
Oh, I could not be happier to be here. And I am so glad we're in the same time zone.
It is amazing. Hey, it's made a big difference already. And just um I have to say, Sharon, so when I touched down in America, obviously you know this, but for everybody who's listening, I don't very often share the details of my explorations in life. But I touched down in America within a week and a half. Jen and I were on this road trip up to Oregon, and so we're driving up California and going into Oregon and driving past Mount Shasta, and we go to this cabin by the lake where there's this family reunion. I'm seeing all of Jen's family and we're playing didgeridoo out on the lake at night with the stars above us and the pine forests like I've never seen before. And then obviously I get to come down and spend time with you, Sharon, in Woodacre, which I guess what I'm trying to say is uh moving to America has been so unbelievably intense in all the best ways, and I'm so excited, like just to see your country and to see the land that you live in. And Woodacre is just unbelievable. And now people can see all of those photos all over the Wall Garden website. But um, I don't know, Sharon, like what about Woodacre do you think do you think that like in your own philosophy, your own life, like just the location of being there in Woodacre, this beautiful little garden village. Um, how's that influenced you throughout your life and your thinking about things?
It's taught me about the power of place. In the case of Woodacre, I happened to drive through it, I think, yeah, it's about 35 years ago. And I took one look at it and I just I decided I had to live there. I didn't even put it into words. I just knew I had to live there. And for anyone who hasn't been here, what is this place? It, like Simon says, it's a wooded little village. There's maybe 900, 1,000 people at the most. And it's a place that attracts a, a lot of people who are creating different kinds of things, uh, writers and painters, but also farmers and um, people raising llamas and so it has the benefit of a small town where everyone recognizes and takes care of one another. The young people look after the elders. The elders make sure the young ones don't get themselves in too much trouble. And I, I don't know, it's just a kind of loose collection of people who are on each other's side. And it's also just jaw-droppingly beautiful.
Mm,
Every day it looks new to me. So
yeah.
I just feel so lucky to be here, and I wish for every person that they can live in whatever they feel is the right place for them.
Yeah. Yeah. It was such a pleasure just to come and see you and just to be around you. They talk about back in the ancient times, when you wanted to go learn from a philosopher, you would you would live with them, around them, you'd walk with them, you'd talk with them, you'd be by their side, and I sensed a spirit of that, when I'm around you, that it's obviously it's going to be completely different to when we're speaking over Zoom. But I hope you know that I'm gonna, you know, attach myself to you like a barnacle. And now that I'm over here in California, and you have no choice in the matter, I will be constantly asking for when you're free for me to come up there and spend time, because it was just, even just spending time wandering around Woodacre. I got to walk up the hill behind your home, and I tell you what, I've never felt more like I was in a scene from The Sound of Music. I'm like walking up this hill into these pine forests, and I'm overlooking this little valley that has all these little homes in it, and they all look tiny, and just stunning pine trees, and just little trails everywhere. And it was just completely magical. And it was exactly the welcome that I needed as well when I came into this country, to go somewhere, to your home, and to be welcome in there, and to wander around, to look, to play the didgeridoo, to write poetry on a hill. And I'm just so grateful for what's happened over the past few months being here, or a couple of months being here. And I guess now things feel as though they're getting a little bit more settled. I think that one of the reasons why I paused the podcast for a couple of months, aside for the reason that I've just been going nonstop for like 2 years now, ever since I quit my job to do the Walled Garden, or to do the podcast full time. But now there's a different sense, in the Walled Garden. I feel like we're really hitting our stride, building a phenomenal team of philosophers who I genuinely love, and I feel like you do too. And it's just a different season, a different time. A couple of months,
Yeah.
it was a season for me to leave the podcast and be like, you know what, let's take a breath.
Right.
But I don't know, now that you've seen some of my plans for the next few months, I don't know, like, is there anything, what would you say to the listeners right now, now that we're all in this together, we're, hitting our stride? I don't know, what's your sense of the moment?
The walled garden, in all of its iterations, gives us all the opportunity to 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 share so much, to learn from one another, and to drop down inside ourselves to that part of us that isn't trying to convince someone else of anything, but is looking out at the world afresh, at all of life's possibilities, with optimism and a readiness to make good things through human connection, through
Mm,
real human connection.
yeah.
It's something you experience. To put it into words, it, I don't know, kind of lands a little flat for me. But when you've had genuine philosophical exchanges, like I've had with you, for example, Simon, or with other members of our community, it's so elevating. I mean, suddenly you see the particulars of your own life with fresh eyes.
Mm, mm. You did mention that to me when I was like up there in Woodacre taking photos everywhere, and you kind of mentioned it'd be good for you to kind of see your own area through the lens of a different, through a different person's eyes, and I feel like, I think you're right there. Just this, I've been really thinking lately about this idea of philosophical dialogue, or philosophical mentoring, philosophical conversation, it is truly curative. And I don't mean in a kind of like, well, you go away feeling well. No, you go away and a part of yourself is healed when you're able to have a genuine philosophical dialogue with another human being. And you once said to me, Sharon, you said like, I'm interested in exploring whether or not we can develop those kinds of relationships through the digital means, you know. Is it possible
Yeah.
really? And I don't think we've necessarily solved that. I don't know, but I do know that, you know, whether it's in my mentoring or in what we're doing with our meetups in the Walled Garden, yeah, you do go away feeling a sense of a, it's it's like when you've had a really deep and meaningful conversation with a close friend, that kind of feeling, you know. And
Yeah.
it's beautiful. It's what life is all about, obviously. Obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A kind of coming home to yourself
Yeah. Yeah. It's wonderful.
afresh. Yeah, it is wonderful.
So I mean, I guess I just really wanted to, uh bring you on the show now that we are kind of kicking things off again. And there's a few other little bits that I want to go into just before we head off, because this will be a short conversation between us, but I'll add something else to the episode. But firstly, I think everybody on the podcast will know by now, and if you don't, that's okay. I'll tell you now that Sharon, I've officially asked you to be the scholarch of the Walled Garden. And for everyone who's listening, I mean, essentially what that means is that I want you, Sharon Lebell, to hold the flame of the Walled Garden and be the almost the gatekeeper for the kind of dialogue that we want to have, for the kind of exploration that we want to have in the Walled Garden, for the general spirit that you might feel being a part of what we're putting together. And and I don't know, like have you had any sense about personally like what that kind of role entails, what or what your goals are, what you see,
Well, to me, one of the one of the most important things, because I've been in many different kinds of philosophical forums throughout my life, academic and otherwise. And what I want to guard against is I, I regret putting this in the negative, but I think it's easiest to understand this way, is that philosophical dialogue unchecked can become intellectual beauty contests. It, it we sometimes when we have an aha within ourselves, it's very easy to think that we've had an aha for one and all, or that we've understood the big everything. And I want us to stay honest and curious, and to avoid the performative, to to I guess I'm just talking about taming our egos, because philosophy does tend to attract clever thinkers, and cleverness is great unless it's performative. And so I want to keep, not through judging other people, but to keep us on track with the intention of always putting curiosity ahead of judgment.
Mm,
Not foreclosing on judgment. I think judgment is very important, but it should be judgment based on discernment and not on somehow trying to elevate our personality,
Yeah.
ourself.
I think that's a really interesting insight and something that I absolutely would have expected from you. And I think that you're the kind of person already who, just by your presence, people don't want to engage in that kind of game, you might say, you know. And yeah, I've heard you speak in similar terms before, but now that you put it like that, it's even more beautiful. I feel as though there's real alignment between that kind of goal of yours and certainly the vision that I have for the walled garden. And it's definitely something at the top of my mind when thinking about who do we bring into the walled garden as our philosophers and our teachers. And man, we've got such a beautiful team, and a team of people who really do have that humility to not make this a pissing contest.
Yeah,
Like you say,
well, that's
like,
exactly it.
yeah.
Or kind of like you said a moment ago, I caught a keyword from what you just said, the idea of a game. We're, this is not a game. We're talking about life, and life is an urgent and precious thing. It's not a game. And so I think we want to bring an attitude of reverence to our exchanges, checked by irreverence, so we don't take ourselves too seriously.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah, I'm all for that. Yeah, I think it's just beautiful to set that kind of tone from the top down in everything that we're doing. And it's exactly why, I wanted you to be the Skulark. And I guess I want to be respectful of your time. I know we kind of talked a lot before doing this brief little interview. I just really wanted to have you on the show, for our first episode back in a while. And I guess for everybody who's listening, I'll probably have already mentioned this, but this Thursday, 3 p.m. California time, PST, I'm going to be running the meetup. It's on Sanctuary, which is actually a concept that I think you planted that seed in my mind, Sharon.
I think that's true.
I
had a great
think you remember
conversation
that.
about that. Yeah,
Definitely. And that seed kind of grew and grew. I ended up doing an assignment about it at university, writing a whole bunch of poetry on the theme, exploring the biblical themes of sanctuary. And so this Thursday, we're really kicking off a new theme in our meetups, and it is messages for our time. And what I mean by that is we're going to have our amazing philosophers come in and present messages that they believe are important for our time. And I've impressed upon everybody that the seriousness of that theme, really, if you had something that you wanted to tell people for this time, this place, what would it be? And so I'll invite everybody to come along. But Sharon, you've been the first person to see the exciting extras that will be announced at this meetup, and I just want to say to everybody, come along and see what's happening in the walled garden.
please come along. Please come along. We need you. We want you.
How can you turn down that invitation from Sharon Lebell? Please, anybody. No, I love it. It's beautiful. It's great. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Walled Garden Podcast. Remember that this show is a part of the podcast network of the Walled Garden Philosophical Society. If you consider yourself to be a seeker of understanding, of wisdom, a cultivator of virtue, then we want to learn and grow with you. Just head over to thewalledgarden.com to find out more. We'll see you there, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.